Good afternoon, everybody. Today is a tremendous day. And yesterday, I wouldn't have said that it was a tremendous day because last night, my whole standard for judging days changed. My sister posted this story on Facebook about an exchange she had with her son, my nephew. He had just come home from preschool, he's 4. And she said, "How was your day?" And he said, "He was tremendous." And she said, "That's great. Why was it a tremendous day?" And he said, "Pablo did not poke me in the eye." I was like, I love that standard. So from now on, that's my standard for what's a tremendous day or not. So at the end of this tremendous day, imagine you go home and you're watching the news on TV. And the anchor person comes on and says, "Next up is a story about high school dropout rates." Now, in your head, what would you say are the odds that this is a feel-good story? Right? And what if they had said, next up is teenage pregnancy, or drunk driving, or air pollution? What are the odds that that's going to be an inspiring, uplifting story? I know for me, if I hear an intro like that, I'm bracing myself for the bad news. But the truth is, one thing that all those indicators have in common is that they're actually positive trends. And in the US, in the last 20 years, each of those has gone up at least 20%. The indicators have improved by at least 20%. Do you know what else has improved by at least 20% during that time? College enrollment, SAT scores, traffic deaths, juvenile crime, infant mortality, per capita gasoline consumption, workplace injuries, air safety, charitable giving, voter turnout, per capita GDP. All of these are actually good news stories. Who knew? Air safety, take air safety. Air safety's actually improved 100% since the 1990s. And it was actually pretty good in the 1990s. So right now, an American kid has a greater chance of being elected president than they do of dying in a commercial airline incident. Now, honestly, be honest. How many of you worry that your kid is going to be elected president? Right? Drunk driving. Between 1991 and 2010, the rate of fatalities dropped by 50%, much more than that for people under 21. And this is a great story, because this change really came from ordinary people making this happen. It was the mad moms, right? It was the sad kids making this change happen. In full disclosure, I was an officer in my high school SAD chapter, and I did win 3rd place in the pumpkin carving contest that SAD had. But one of the most amazing, most inspiring feel-good story in recent years, you know what I'm going to say? You know what it is? Feel-good, inspiring? Violent crime, right? Violent crime. One of the best indicators we have, or most common indicators of violent crime, is the number of incidents per 1,000 people. In 15 years, that went from 51 to 15. I mean, that is a huge change. And what do Americans believe is happening with violent crime? The opposite. So during that same time period, Gallup surveyed Americans to say, you know, what are the trends on crime? More than 2/3 of Americans every year said it's going up, it's getting worse. When, in fact, the very opposite was true. So why do we have such a disconnect? Why aren't we more attuned to the good news around us? So I'm stealing a lot of this from a guy named Stephen Johnson, and he articulates some of the reasons for this disconnect. And one of the reasons is actually psychological. It's something in the human brain and how we internalize, how we implant negative ideas in our brain. So how many of you think that half of all marriages end in divorce? Right? And how many of you, even if you don't think it now, sometime in the last 20 years have thought that, or maybe even said it, right? That hasn't been true since 1982. You know, marriage rates have improved by, or divorce rates have dropped by more than 30% during that time. But the negative is persistent in our memory. Another reason for this disconnect is a media bias toward the negative story, which I think we all feel. And Johnson actually cites a really great example of this. So the Washington Post, 1997. Do you guys remember 1997? You remember what was happening? It was actually in the middle of the biggest peacetime economic boom we've ever had. Like the economy was doing as well as possible. Washington Post is a left-leaning paper, a little bit. They had a left-leaning president in the White House, pre-Lewinsky scandal, right? Like things are looking good for the Washington Post, if that's your outlook on the world. Of all the editorials on the op-ed page in 1997, what percentage would you guess were about positive trends? 5%. 5% about positive things at a time when so many good things were happening. 71% of the editorials were about negative trends. And another reason for this disconnect, the last one I'm going to talk about, but the one that hits close for a lot of us in this room, is that Johnson would say one of the reasons why people have such a negative outlook on a lot of social trends is because of the nonprofit and advocacy community, right? That's a lot of us. There are a lot of us in this room who use data to make the case for policy change or to make the case for people to fund us. To do that, we need the data to look bad, right? And not just bad. We need it to look worse for our issue than for that other issue. And we need it to look worse for our community than for that other community, because we are competing for resources and attention based on how bad the data looks. And we've all gotten a lot more sophisticated on how to do that and how to use media to get those messages across. So I think it's possible that we're now sending so many negative messages that about the state of our state and the state of our communities that we're actually having the opposite effect of what we intend. That each one of us individually mean to inspire action by attracting attention to the issue that we care about, but collectively, I fear we may be overwhelming the public, and even in some cases paralyzing them. Because if the problems seem too big and too many, it's hard to feel hopeful about what we can accomplish. Optimism is really important. Believing that you can do something is actually a really good predictor of whether you will be able to actually do it. And taking on our big social challenges requires optimism. I'm not saying things are fine. This is not about saying things are fine. We have real problems, and there are plenty of indicators where the trajectories really are negative. It's about how we frame the challenges as we talk about them. And it's about finding a way to talk about challenges that gives people hope and that focuses on the possibility within that data. It's important that we get positive data trends into the public consciousness. So stories like the drop in drunk driving rates, even if that's not our issue, having people see that example of what individuals can do and how we can make a difference on big problems affects all of us and our ability to inspire people to follow us, to go after whatever challenge it is that we're working toward. Success breeds success, and the more we can show people that we can take on challenges and we can improve some of these indicators, the more excited people will be to sign up. Our Minnesota Compass team today has presented all kinds of great data, positive and negative, on trends. And I just encourage you to remember the positive. Don't just take away the negative. And when you go back and you're thinking about your own world and the issue that you care about, find the good news. What's the good news in your issue area? And show the good news. Talk about the good news. And I don't mean just saying, like, here's the good news and here's the bad news. But even within the bad news, what's the good news? What are the signs of hope? What's the success that we can build on? How can we use data to build hope? And how can we use data to showcase success? And how can we use data to build optimism that we can take on these challenges for the state? That is critical to having our communities energized and inspired for action. And that is critical for having a Minnesota that's the Minnesota we want it to be.